It's the state of the dungeon. It's a video that Rob does about his games. Yeah! Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the prologue for my newest campaign, the Gifter Saga, played on Mighty Protectors, Villains and Vigilantes 3.0. I am Rob, the creator and game master for this series, and the entire premise of the game begins with the question, if you had a choice, which would you choose? Enough money to take care of all of your debts, allow you to live comfortably, and ensure that you never had to work again. Or the ability to have superpowers. No promises on what superpowers you get, or where the origin of the money comes from. So which would you choose? For the purposes of this game, all of the heroes chose superpowers, clearly. But that's not going to be a universal choice. And the premise, beyond that very question, involves a group. Nobody knows the origin, and many will speculate, that goes and makes this offer to a variety of people around the world. These people are chosen. Many of them have a rather high chance of choosing the superpowers, although some will not. And they come from all walks of life. Successful, poor, jobless, young, old. Quite a range. When the question is asked, the person who is asked the question, for some reason, feels at ease, not threatened by the person asking the question, despite the fact that it is a rather random question, and sometimes the person asking the question is going to find that person in a place where they often wouldn't see someone. Perhaps when they wake up in the middle of the night and a stranger is in their room and asks them the question. Perhaps they're walking down the street and someone taps them on the shoulder and asks the question. In all cases, the people being asked do not feel afraid. They are free, mentally clear, to answer the question as they wish. When the question has been asked, the person acknowledges and then walks away. The person who has been asked cannot find that person from then on out. Then, the person goes about their day. Maybe they go back to sleep. Maybe they continue on their day. But something happens. Always. Some crisis point or some revelation where if they chose superpowers, their superpowers manifest, often driven by events that necessitate them using them. A life or death crisis, perhaps. A conflict, possibly. Some of these circumstances are natural to the gifted's state. But some are not. Some are quite clearly part of a greater upwelling of events. What happens to the people who choose the money? No one yet knows. We are yet early into the Gifter Saga, and those stories have not yet been told. Now, some will say that the gifters themselves, those who offer these powers and give them, are clearly capable of advanced technology, magic, some source which can actually give what they offer. It's also known that not everybody gets these gifts in the same measure. Some get what seem to be relatively useless gifts. Some get ones that are very, very powerful indeed. What is clear is that there are a few people who claim they know the answers. Some are merely fanciful liars, and perhaps one or two actually do know the truth. For the theme of this, it is normal people put in extraordinary circumstances. When creating the characters are not to be someone who is just stepping into the role of a superhero because that's what they were made for. The most compelling superheroes, I find, are ones who are just normal folk who have to deal with the trials and tribulations of their day, and on top of that, superpowers and all the challenges that brings, the responsibilities, the dangers, and the thrills and rewards. So, for this, the Gifter Saga, the characters are all normal people from any walk of life who are offered a question and answer it with, they would choose superpowers. And when they do, the player characters themselves are lucky. They are ones that get useful superpowers in a style very much like the comic books. The ability to throw energy blasts, or fly, or transform their bodies in some way, or gifted with strange resources and exotic knowledge that they themselves did not possess. These characters truly are gifted, and better off than some who do accept the offer. They don't know a great deal yet, certainly not why or how, but they are blessed with these powers. In the Gifter Saga campaign, each of the characters was given an hour to an hour and a half to have a solo origin story, basically, which detailed what their life was like before the Gifter Saga, how their day-to-day life was impacted by the crises of 2020, including the coronavirus. Yes, this is very much in the real world, taken as a snapshot on April 1st, 2020. So, life has been turned on its ear for most people. However, for the characters at hand, that slice of their life was set in motion and then all of a sudden halted when again they were asked the question, and they chose superpowers. The gifters gave them their superpowers, and then the crisis occurred. For some, it was the arrival of men in black come to apprehend them mysteriously. For some, it was a combat encounter that all of a sudden they had powers they weren't expecting that assisted them in fighting off their attackers. And then for another, it was their powers just triggering and causing an embarrassing collapse. In all cases, the characters were given an anonymous note warning them that there were people who would soon be looking for them, and that it was in their best interest to avoid these figures. They were given an address to a warehouse, and told that they would have help in escaping if they accepted the offer. All of the player characters chose this. Some of them were chased by the men in black. Not the cartoony movie Men in Black, mind you, but people who were directing squads of what appeared to be SWAT team members with assault rifles and body armor. The heroes were all up to the challenge, either using their powers to help them escape or fleeing with the help of a mysterious assistant named Chauffeur, who apparently could take control of vehicles and operate them extraordinarily well. All of them eventually got to the warehouse, where they were instructed to go inside to find a microjet waiting for them to carry them to their next location. Some of the characters were dealing with the onset of their powers and had some disadvantages as they were going, but they managed to get into the plane successfully and fly off. These heroes, as we'll call them generously, were delivered to an unknown site, somewhere along the eastern seaboard of Canada, and delivered to a private property airfield. They were brought to an underground bunker, where they met a mysterious man who introduced himself as Lord Ambrosius Warbridge, Duke of Northumbria, and that he was one who shared in their fortune and himself had a gift. He revealed that his gift was to know what is happening, to know what's going on and what will come. Quite a powerful gift indeed, if true. He offered them the resources to be able to hide away from the rest of the world as necessary, as the government agencies had also been tipped off to the presence of the gifted, and many of them had formed their own cabals and organizations attempting to control the situation in whatever means they deemed necessary. Clearly, in the case of the characters, who were all American, This involved apprehending them and whisking them off somehow. But where the characters were, they were relatively safe, although they didn't know the folk around them, but they're superheroes. They all had their own resources. An introduction at this point to the superheroed characters would be appropriate. First of all, you have Dr. Crawford, a brilliant mind working as an agricultural chemist at Madison's University, and herself, generally a person no one would suspect of potentially being a superhero, suddenly finding in herself the ability to project herself astrally out of her own body, to move around intangibly as a ghost, and see things and experience things, although invisible and intangible at the time. She also has the power to generate blasts of energy, the ability to fire off forces of psychic power from her mind, as well as the ability to fly when she is not in astral form at a fairly good speed. You have Takeshi Kaneki. I'll get these names right eventually. Who, as a young man of Japanese American descent, has the ability to fly, the ability to increase his own density so that he gets incredibly durable. However, he cannot use that power at the same time that he flies. He is able to fire off bolts of force and generate a force field, which he can project to protect others or objects. His force bolts aren't that powerful, but can be developed, and his force field that he generates is quite strong and able to block small arms fire. He also has a kind of temporal fugue, wherein he can see himself from the future and be guided to greater heights of experience and excellence. This allows him to have extra levels of experience that will help most any endeavors that he tries to do. In addition, we have Mr. Z, a B-movie actor who has gotten superpowers of super strength, the ability to absorb kinetic damage and redirect it into getting even stronger, as well as the ability to spit a corrosive fluid, which is capable of dissolving organic tissue, and doing that from quite a great distance. Then we have Dan McMillan, who is able to pick up wireless broadcasts of all varieties. Internet, cell phone, radio. He can eavesdrop, listen in for his own entertainment, and even to a certain extent broadcast organically from his own powers. He can reflect kinetic attacks that are incoming back at the attackers or use them for his own ends. He can also do this with entropic energy. He has incredible durability, being able to be stabbed without much great effect. He has an incredible amount of health, although he doesn't have the ability to heal it very quickly. And he can also manipulate gravity himself. He can make a target feel the effects of 12 times their natural gravity, for most people causing them to crumple in a heap and slowly crush under their own weight. Or he can create a small gravity well, which can cause things to be heavier when they pass through it. Not very powerful yet, but something that he can certainly work towards and develop. We also have Axel Redding, who, a former military man who was a little suspicious, perhaps more so than is healthy, of other people, was rewarded with his gifts and incredible reflexes to avoid danger, an innate sense to tell when danger is coming and to have the world slow down as he reacts to it in his own time, the ability to generate a force field to defend himself, and also to project a force blast that is quite powerful. He also has the ability to force people away from him with powerful repulsion blasts that can send most people flying with a good roll. These characters combined all have a variety of powers which overlap with each other and make the user far more than just a normal person. As to how they use them and how wisely, that will remain to be seen. The characters were allowed to talk to Lord Warbridge for a while to satisfy their own curiosity and some assurance that their needs would be met. For instance, Dr. Crawford was interested in the safety of her parents and was reassured that they were taken care of. The same goes for Mr. Konecki. The characters were promised a comfortable lifestyle, the kind of funds that would well reward them after their initial round of whatever was called upon them. Mr. Warbridge wasn't very explicit on exactly the nature of themselves or himself or what the future will hold, just the assurance that whatever they would go up against, they would have advanced warning because of his gift. The group seemed to acknowledge that. Perhaps they were frightened because of the assault upon them, apparently by government figures, or just the very simple fact they realized that their lives got infinitely more complicated and a person was offering them a potential way out or to at least succeed in what they were attempting to move forward into. The second session, which I now feel I can reveal many of the details that I had just revealed, opened with them being toured through the underground area that they found themselves in, which was called Foxhaven. A rather extensive series of rooms, underground tunnels, would give them a fair range of options for living comfortably, if not under optimal circumstances, and in relative security. An external ring that was shielded so that they could demonstrate their powers and exercise outdoors in some semblance of comfort and security, as well as some rudimentary facilities where they could, for example, tinker with gadgets and gear, eat, sleep, bathe comfortably, and so on. Transport was promised that could be arranged for them as needed. They were given an opportunity to demonstrate their powers. It seems that Mr. Warbridge knows all their powers even better than they themselves did, revealing to some of them extra levels of power that they weren't aware of. For instance, Dr. Crawford was introduced to the power of her Mind Blast, and he revealed the chemical spray ability that Mr. Z has. The characters were also encouraged to find a personal identity that they could live with, because their personal identities might be something that could be disadvantageous to them to have revealed to at least to the general public. And it is at least hoped that the agencies that attempted to apprehend them would not out themselves in such a way as to reveal that sensitive information that they had gleaned about the characters. So all the characters in turn ended up coming up with their own names. Mr. Z chose to be known as Muscles. Certainly an apt description of his power and where his thinking comes from. The young Takeshi chose Bulwark for his defensive abilities. Dan McMillan chose Rook, an ongoing name. Dr. Crawford chose Ghost. Axel chose Sentinel, which with his precognitive abilities for danger sense seems apt. So, the characters all got their identities, they got some body armor that they could wear, and even those who don't have special protections can feel at least a modicum of safety. And they were sent on their very first mission, which was to go to Montreal to prevent a bank robbery. This was an effort to generate some public relations and generally get some good press. This was going to be their first action against another gifted, and they were warned this person has access to ranged power blasts. They also were going to have to deal with some standard humans who were armed with weapons. So this was something the group felt like they could do quite well. A large amount of the planning went into how to approach the bank. A lot of the complications come around Mr. Z, who is currently 10 feet tall, and built like the Incredible Hulk, quite frankly. Maybe he's a little smaller than the Hulk, but only a little bit. And even though he's wearing clothes, he's not walking around in just shredded pants, he does tend to stand out. Also, the entire group is dressed in tactical black, so a group who's hanging around a bank dressed like that might draw some attention. Fortunately, Sentinel had a plan of going through service alleyways and back channels to get to within striking distance of the bank, so that they could work to defend it and intercede when it was attacked. The others had some ideas involving masquerading as cleaning agents and getting a service van they could go right up to the bank in. This was shot down because they didn't feel comfortable with stealing a van. Also, the group decided, once they had gotten into position, and they succeeded with amazingly good stealth rolls. The curses that had affected their dice in the solo sessions did not seem to be impeding them tonight. So they, unfortunately at this time also, Mr. Takeshi, Bulwark, wasn't able to go on, so he was left behind at Foxhaven. So the four intrepid heroes were waiting outside of an alley within full view of the front access to the bank. They decided to allow Ghost to go astral and investigate, which she did. She went in through the front and looked around in the service area, revealing that they did have live tellers, but it was all screened off because of the coronavirus fear. So they were temperature checking people who needed to use the bank and limiting how many people could go in and limiting the services that they offered, which was interesting enough. However, it wasn't very long before there was a loud explosion at the back of the bank. A sharp crack that alerted most of the group. Of course, at this time, Ghost wasn't back in her body, so the rest couldn't really move, but Ghost went to investigate and found out that 3 vans had pulled up in the back of the bank. One on either end of the alley to close it off from anybody coming in within, and one van that was parked behind a large metal door that was obviously there for dropping off and picking up large sums of money or whatever else the bank was holding. This was in smoking ruin, and not least of which because while the men standing around were wearing black bulletproof vests and carrying AR-15 rifles, the person who apparently had done the damage was wearing a red jumpsuit and blonde hair, power-mad grin, and his hands were smoking, with a faint aura still going from where he had launched energy from. Ghost saw that and darted back to her body, which with her speed takes almost no time at all, and she woke up and told everybody that the attack was coming from the back. The group decided they were going to proceed with all speed to the back, and Ghost told them about the power blast user. So they started running across the street. It was a wide street in the financial section of Montreal. And as they were running, one of them was flying. That would be Ghost. Then they looked and they saw that there was a camera crew for a news station that was taking a look at some of the protests that had been going on over the shutdown that was being enforced through Canada. And they were doing a piece on it. It wasn't an unruly protest or anything, but they were getting camera time. The cameraman, however, was very quick to find a different target when he saw Dr. Crawford actually flying across the street at speed. She grounded herself, kind of seemed somewhat embarrassed to have outed herself in her powers, but they proceeded across the street anyway. The camera crew was about to get a much better feast for their camera. When they rounded the corner around the insurance agency at the end of the block, they saw the first van that was blocking the alleyway, and the 2 men standing outside who were, again, dressed in bulletproof vests and had AR-15 rifles. So they proceeded to charge, for all that included. For the most part, none of them are, physically disabled, so they were able to make pretty good speed, but there was a fair amount of land distance, enough to give them a round of being able to use ranged attacks. To this end, first of all, Sentinel, who almost always will be going first due to his incredible senses, charged forward and issued one of his initial power blasts from his force field ability. He hit the first goon so hard that it slammed him into the van itself and actually sent the van rocking back to strike the second goon. The first goon was clearly crippled and on the ground. He was not going to get up from that. The van was still drivable. It only had some damage to the front end, how much a human body can do. But the goon in the back was alerted, and his armor had absorbed the blow, so he was still in just fine shape. At this point, Mr. Z leapt up on top of the van, and despite the fact that he's very, very heavy, he's 1,500 pounds in weight, the van actually weathered the impact quite well and only crumpled the top a bit. The goon couldn't help but see Mr. Z, and recovering quickly, he fired off a hasty burst from his gun, a 3-round burst at Mr. Z, who, because he had leapt, wasn't prepared to take the rounds and try to absorb the damage, so instead he used his rolling with the blow ability and his own body armor to take no damage from the impact. So just a spattering of bullets, and Mr. Z dodged out of the way of it, effectively, only spending a small amount of his power to do so. At this point, Ghost was allowed to go, and she fired off a power blast at the goon. Her shot was true, sheared through his gun as he was trying to shoot at Muscles, and destroyed his gun, hit him, and knocked him so hard he flipped a few times over onto the street before lying very still and unconscious, with a very, very powerful blast. All the heroes looked quite good in this exchange. It was a fairly impressive display of their initial powers. Rook, not wanting to spend the round not doing anything, charged up, and he increased the gravity on Muscles, increasing his own weight to the point where Muscles could still carry himself. His carrying capacity is around 15 tons of weight. So even though he now weighed about 3 tons, he could still carry himself, but he did manage to punch through the roof of the van and cause the bottom to bulge. Well, at this, they saw down the alleyway that there was the other van. No sign of the superpowered fellow, but two goons guarding the van with guns. So at this time, Sentinel raced around the corner and was barreling head-on at the goons at the van. Mr. Z decided he was going to bend over, pull the van up over his head, basically making a him-sized hole in the middle of it, press it, and start moving down the alleyway, holding the van in front of him for cover. Preposterous, but hilarious at the same time. The goons took one look at that and opened fire. One of them took a shot at Sentinel, the unarmed man who was charging at them wearing black tactical armor. He fired. Because of his incredible defenses, Sentinel actually managed to dodge the bullets in flight. He's that good. So the goon was not able to lay a blow on him. Sentinel then powered up his force field as he was running as well. Mr. Z took some rounds off of his van, but didn't punch through the van, didn't hit him at all. At this point, Ghost comes around the corner and seeing the problem, and just seeing the bullets spatter past her, or hearing them more to the point, fired off a mental blast at the goon who had shot at Sentinel. She hit, and dealing nearly maximum damage, fried his synapses. He dropped, making a pitiful meowing sound, and pitched forward onto his face. Rook decided he was going to crush the other guy and hold him down. However, his accuracy leaves a little bit to be desired, and he instead made the bumper on the van very, very, very heavy, to the point where it fell off. But he did not actually affect the goon. So the next round comes up, and Sentinel goes again, pulls out the personal defense shock taser that was issued to them when they went off, and plunged it into the chest of the goon. He rolled respectable damage on the energy attack that manifested, which he weathered because armor and because of his little bit of rolling with the blow ability. However, he completely blew his endurance roll to not be fried. As a mook, he just dropped. Well, when you are, a massive, massive man holding a van, and you see at the far end of the alley, there's another van with two other guys, what do? He threw the van. You may think this is silly. This is a superhero game. It's not silly. He threw it, but luck was not on his side, and he missed. So, instead of throwing a perfectly true launching of the van at the other van, which he could have done, instead it veered off, hit the back of the bank, ricocheted off after doing some minor structural damage, hit a small restaurant, caved in a portion of the wall, bounced off, hit the bank again, and then finally smashed into the back of a small antique store on the back front of the rest of the block. He did about $17,000 worth of structural damage. It's all in a day's work. So now the other goons are aware of the characters, who now have cover behind the van or in the recessed area by the door. This is where we ended the game. So they all had a chance to show off their superpowers. They got a chance to see some structural damage on a superhero level, which is fun. And at the same time, they learned that a normal human with a gun, not a very big danger to them, but still the kind of thing that allows them to flex their abilities and show how cool they are, and get ready for the next step. So, this has been my State of the Dungeon address. I hope you enjoy it. This has been our first foray into Mighty Protectors, Villains and Vigilantes 3.0. And so far, it's very promising as far as being smooth, feeling like our characters are powerful and everything that you'd want in a superhero game, with a fast and flexible method of resolving conflict and allowing me to narrate it at suitably heroic levels. Also, the characters have their opportunities to occasionally fail, which is appropriate in superhero fights as well. So, thank you very much for joining me. I hope that you tune back in again the next time that we have a session, 2 weeks, and we'll continue on with the Gifter's Saga. Thank you, and farewell.